Hello, welcome again to Sport Unlocked with me, Rob Harris from Sky News, Martyn Ziegler from The Times, and Tariq Panja from The New York Times. And some headlines from the FIFA Council meeting at the end of this week. A decision on who will be the host of the new 32-team Men's Club World Cup starting in 2025. It will be the United States, all ahead of the World Cup being there and in Canada and Mexico the following year. But there's a delay to the vote on the 2030 World Cup, which now won't be until the end of 2024. We couldn't hear from Gianni Infantino why, because there was no news conference after that council meeting. But, Martyn, this week we have been hearing from the UEFA president, and Alexander Sheffrin's been talking, amongst other things, about Saudi Arabia and all those players leaving European clubs to head there.
He doesn't see it as a threat to the European leagues or the Champions League or whatever. Basically, I think he effectively said these are players towards the end of their careers, but what people really want to watch is still going to be the European competitions. So, I think that's probably true, isn't it? I can't see people tuning in massively to watch the Saudi League. I suppose there might be more interest globally in the Saudi League than there has been before, if you've got Ronaldo there already and then these other sort of big names coming in. But it's not easy just to drum up interest, is it, just by signing... I think China tried to do it, didn't they? A load of players went for a lot of money similarly towards the end of their careers. And did that work? Probably not.
And there was a time we were talking about China as a potential 2030 World Cup host, but I think those plans faded long ago. And will Saudi Arabia's hopes be vanishing for 2030 at least? Some questions about whether they will continue to pursue a bid, having been linked with Greece and Egypt in a triple country bid in the past. All part of that World Cup process that, we have heard has been delayed. There were calls this week for FIFA to rigorously apply still their human rights guidelines to those bids. And human rights, obviously one of those big concerns raised about Saudi Arabia. It's certainly not, though, a concern it would seem for the players heading there with so much money on offer, so many more joining. We've had Karim Benzema already in this transfer window, and N'Golo Kante as well in Chelsea, and it really is providing that outlet, isn't it, Tariq, for players to go to a very lucrative new destination. But how many really will be watching their games around the world?
No, it's like when Cristiano Ronaldo went in January, didn't he, after the World Cup? And I guess for that first week, there is that, this is strange, this is a bit weird. People might be interested in him being there for the first week or so. And I don't think anyone really paid much more attention. I think more interestingly, in terms of the players going there, the one that caught my eye actually aren't the over 30s. Ruben Neves from Wolverhampton, he talked not a month ago about having this great ambition to play for one of the big clubs. Pretty much wanted to go to Barcelona. There was some interest there. And he's off, I think, to Al Hilal, where he will at least be in the same league as one of his former managers, Nuno Espirito de Santo. They have the same agent, George Mendes. Wherever there's a hot transfer market, be it in Europe, China, or now Saudi Arabia, George Mendes is there, and Ruben Neves is gone. So if that's the thing, if that tier of players who are in their prime or approaching their prime go, it kind of changes the dynamics a little bit.
And if you are good enough, then you could return to Europe as well. So you might think, a bit like China, maybe this is a short-lived window, although it seems a longer-term vision in Saudi Arabia. So why not cash in now? And if you actually are still rated, then a club will sign you. We see it with the likes of Real Madrid, don't we, in terms of players that you might think they wouldn't have interest in. Joselu, he was a former academy prodigy, wasn't he there? He went to Stoke and went all round over many years, and what is now in his 30s now.
It's a proper professional league. They do already have lots of interest there. So is this a sort of a domestic or an internationally aimed drive, or both? And I suppose it's not easy just to... we can look at the French league and PSG. They've got the best players in the world, but in terms of driving interest in the French league, it doesn't necessarily work that immediately.
Yeah, but I think that's why this idea, whether they're able to pull it off or not, is yet to be seen. But you mentioned PSG. PSG is this team that is pretty much far and away the best team in France. What the Saudis are trying to do is I'm not sure they're going to pull it off, because I understand behind the scenes there's a lot of chaos, but have the players split between a bunch of teams. So we already heard that the Public Investment Fund is going to buy the top 4 teams, and they're going to have 3 top international players in each of those top 4 teams, and then others distributed elsewhere in order for there to be a, I guess maybe artificially, but an artificially competitive league where teams can beat each other eventually. There's going to be an interest in this. But the fans in Saudi, Rob, they like football already. They like these teams. Al Hilal have got a huge fan base. Saudi Arabian fans are very intelligent when it comes to supporting their local teams and international football. It's not like a white blank space and football's arriving. It's got a good tradition, hasn't it?
There is the Saudi market, the Asian market to be the dominant force in, to be constantly winning the Asian Champions League, to be strong in the FIFA Club World Cup, even to sort of secure success there. So, there is an audience, there is a market there. Of course, the big team in the Middle East at the moment is Manchester City, Abu Dhabi's Manchester City. And this was the one time in a year we get to hear from the chairman, Khaldoon Al-Mubarak, always in an in-house interview. So no chance of independent media questioning. But he was asked about the Premier League charges. That was probably the main thing. But again, he talked about vaguely about their response, but we've never had any sort of rebuttal in terms of going through why the charges are actually wrong, although the case is ongoing.
Yeah, he said it's frustrating, I think was the word he used, and that he will speak bluntly about them one day, but, however many years that is. We wait with eager anticipation to see. But the Abu Dhabi influence over Manchester City was sort of brought into sort of sharp focus, Tariq, by the reception awarded to the Champions League trophy and Pep Guardiola.
There's remarkable scenes there. I'm not sure which royal palace it was in Abu Dhabi, but you have this enormous kind of entryway lined by well-wishers. At the end, there was a table. There was Sheikh Mansour, the Man City owner, also the deputy vice president of the UAE and the brother of the emir, was there. There was a sword. There was a cake. There was Pep Guardiola with all those shiny bits of metal they've won, the Champions League trophy, the Premier League and the FA Cup, all being taken there. It did remind me, I must say, of images from the olden days when European royals would send their fleets out into the world, and then they'd arrive back with the booty from whichever outpost these kind of sailors and adventurers had gone to, and brought them back and then presented them to the royals. It really did look a lot like that, I must say.
Yeah, I know what you mean. That's a very, very good analogy. I suppose we talked previously before about the ownership around Manchester City. The club always insists it's a sort of privately owned project of Sheikh Mansour, but it did look very much as though this was the country rewarding its heroes, or celebrating its heroes at least, rather than rewarding them.
I mean, what the interview did actually highlight, of course, is their investment in the club. It talked about the expansion of the stadium. They are going up to 60,000 and they are putting that investment. And it does contrast with Manchester United and the minimum investment in Old Trafford.
Yeah, that is one of the things the new owners, if there are going to be new owners of Manchester United, are going to have to tackle, because it is sort of desperately in need of some money being put in. Manchester City now, I mean, according to the Deloitte Rich List, they're the richest club in the world. They have the biggest revenues, which obviously they can, the owners will point to that as the fact. I think Khaldoon Al-Mubarak actually referred to them as the biggest brand in the world, which it's I suppose that's up for dispute, but you can't sort of claim other than the fact that the revenues say that's correct.
And he did claim that the group is worth $6 billion, so they have got clubs all around the world.
Well, yeah, but if you look at, I was at a law firm recently that does M&A transactions in the football space, and you talk to kind of anyone, and they talk about the biggest brands in football, and Manchester City just is not the biggest brand in football. And the proof in the pudding, I guess, is if you are the biggest brand and the most popular, you should be signing the biggest global commercial partnerships because you're so popular, because so many people want to be associated with you. You would get the best and biggest sponsorship deals for one, and they don't. Yes, they're extremely successful on the pitch. Yes, they generate huge amount of revenue thanks to TV rights from Champions League and Premier League. And yes, they do from sponsors in the Middle East. But big international sponsorship deals, Man City don't have the top one. So you've got to say, why not? Why are the sponsors not paying up if the club is that popular?
Which clubs do you think are getting those big sponsorship deals, though? We've got Barcelona, who have struck the Spotify naming rights, but Manchester United had TeamViewer as their sponsor, shirt sponsor, company I'd never heard of until they announced it a couple of years ago, and now they've announced they're trying to find a new sponsor. Chelsea are in talks with a betting company as well. So are we seeing these huge blue chip sponsors actually getting involved with clubs?
We still do, don't we, Martyn? Go on, sorry.
No, I was going to say, yeah, I think it takes many, many, many years to sort of build up the sort of global, we're talking decades, to build up that sort of global positioning that Real Madrid, Manchester United, Barcelona have. And it's difficult for any club to come in and break that. And they are I think most people would think if you're a big commercial company and you want to have the biggest global reach, then you will attach your product to one of those kinds of clubs rather than clubs who have sort of emerged into top spots more recently. PSG, Manchester City, for example.
Yeah, my final point on that is just the dichotomy of what Rob said, Khaldoon Al Mubarak said in the interview, that they're the biggest global brand in football, right? So just that as a point, whether if that is the case, the other big global brands that want to advertise would attach themselves to you. It just stands to reason. It doesn't matter if it's Man City or Watford or Luton, whoever. If you are the biggest global brand, that means more people are watching you than anybody else. More people are interested in associating. So why aren't they? And again, I'll just leave that open. I don't know.
Yeah, obviously, it's their search for increased revenue to spend on the squad, and they are spending in this summer transfer window. Well, one club that went through its own sale in the last year was, of course, Chelsea to Todd Bowley in the Clear Lake route, something we've talked about so much. But one thing that has been less focused on is actually what happened to the proceeds of that sale, £2.5 billion in that government negotiated forced sale, with Abramovich being sanctioned back at the start of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And it's something that sort of shone to light in recent days. Nick Harris in the Mail on Sunday, Tariq, then you did some reporting on it as well, and we seem to be at an impasse.
Yeah, Martyn, actually, you wrote about this a few weeks ago, didn't you?
Yeah, it's the fact is that the money is still in a frozen bank account belonging to Fordstam, Roman Abramovich's company, which has been frozen, and which actually we should also mention is late in filing its accounts and has been issued with a warning by Companies House over that. So much bureaucracy. There's the government, several different governments since this happened, obviously. Then there's the EU involvement as well. And then Abramovich has to sign it off himself as well. So all these things are sort of conspiring. But the fact is, huge amounts of money meant to be going to the victims of the war in Ukraine, and nothing's happened.
Is it an issue? How does Abramovich sign off on something if he's sanctioned?
No. I think to be honest with you, I think that's the least of the problems here. The issues, for me, from what I understand, is in this idea of where the money can be spent. Because if you remember at the time, and it's 13 months, it's a really long time, and this would be one of the biggest, if not the biggest, emergency humanitarian foundations in the world. So the club was sold for $2.5 billion. The charity was going to get 2.3 billion of that. So 200. That's also interesting. 200 million has gone in costs in that deal. Some people have done very well, but 2.3 billion. And the issue was the language. It was for the victims of the Ukraine war everywhere. the British government are insisting, if you speak to Mike Penrose, the former UNICEF guy who's been put in charge of this foundation, that the money has to be spent within the borders of Ukraine. And he's saying, hang on, this is just mad, because the victims of the war in Ukraine, that would include the millions of refugees from Ukraine who are elsewhere. It could include, British families struggling with the cost of living who have Ukrainian refugees in their homes. And it could be those countries in the Horn of Africa, Somalia, Sudan, etc., who, because of the grain crisis that was sparked from the war, are in, close to famine-like conditions, and they want to spread this money. They're saying they are prevented from doing this because of one of these clauses. And the other charities, independent charities, Oxfam have spoken about this, Save the Children as well. They're backing Penrose in this and saying, the government has to be a bit more open-minded.
I suppose from the government's point of view, you want some sort of certainty that it wouldn't be spent in Russia, for example, because you can say there's victims of war in Russia. So how do you stop that happening?
Correct.
What if the expectation was the fact perhaps the war might have finished by now so they could start to use it to reinvest in the rebuilding of Ukraine? But certainly the way things are at the moment, the counteroffensive by Ukraine, there's no clear end in sight where actually you could start investing money in a reconstruction.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, Rob. Probably the idea originally was that people thought this will end, the conflict would have ended, and you could actually use it as part of the rebuilding strategy. Because Mike Penrose has talked about agricultural projects and educational projects within Ukraine, which obviously would be the perfect use of that sort of money. But as you say, it's there is no end in sight.
Moving now to racism in football, and we've been hearing quite a bit from Gianni Infantino in the last week or so about his proposal for a new anti-racism task force led by Vinicius Jr. Just 7 years since his few months into his stint at FIFA was marked by him disbanding the previous anti-racism task force, and instance as well across the world in the last week too. So what do we make of this task force that's the new revival of the old one?
Well, the initial one, I think, was shut down on the basis that it had achieved all its aims, which I thought was at the time, I think everyone thought that was a very strange thing, that as though racism in football had sort of been dealt with and, we could all sit back and everything will be fine, because actually looking back on since 2017, it's got probably worse in many areas.
I was just looking, while you were speaking, just looking at something. I was trying to remember, and it was Kevin Prince Boateng, the player I was thinking of. What happens is Gianni Infantino, again, feels like a bit of a populist move, maybe. This is happening in the news. Vinny's in the news. Vinicius Jr.'s in the news. Let's add him into the task force. And if you remember in 2013, it was Kevin Prince Boateng in the news. He was the guy who was AC Milan, I think, at the time. Much travelled Kevin Prince Boateng, who was racially abused in a pre-season game. I think the game had to be abandoned, and then he's whacked on the task force. There needs to be a more of a strategy and a plan rather than, hey, I'm going to make an announcement. We have to be seen to be doing something. And here we are. But it's more the measures, more strict measures rather than having task forces. Like, people need something to lose if they're going to be racist in public at football stadiums.
And the fact that Vinicius was asked to lead this effort, which has been characterised as you're putting the onus on the victim to actually find the solution. Of course, he might well want to be part of this drive, but it does put that onus on him, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it does. Slightly surprising that somebody who is the sort of main victim should then be sort of put in as the sort of figurehead. You can understand why it might be a sort of a good strategy in terms of getting public attention, but I would imagine Vinicius Jr. would probably prefer not to do that in many ways. He would prefer that actually the issue was being dealt with without him having to, I'm just surmising, obviously, having not spoken to him about it, but prefer that the issue dealt with it without him having to take the lead in a way.
And it can seem like policy on the hoof, can't it? Infantino announcing it while at Brazil training in Barcelona, no sort of clear announcement, no big sort of rollout of an anti-racism strategy. It either seems to be Infantino on the hoof or sort of announced by Instagram post, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a policy by social media posts, but he's not the first one, is he? I mean, FIFA have for a long time loved a task force. They don't really achieve much. They get a lot of attention, maybe some headlines, and then these task forces meet a few times and nothing happens. Maybe get some experts in. Maybe FIFA lead. It is the governing body of football. Is it that hard? And I think it is the question. I remember talking to the Brazilian FA president, Reginaldo Rodriguez, just before the World Cup in Qatar. And he was saying, look, just stadium bans, points deductions, like meaningful, hard penalties would help alleviate some of this, because it's just too easy, isn't it? Kick a couple of idiots out of a football stadium and move on. But this happens on a weekly basis. There isn't any real punch to this stuff.
No, and we do see the complication, actually, why it's a far more in-depth area to explore and analyse and find solutions for, just with instance this week, don't we? We have had, New Zealand playing against Qatar, and a New Zealand player alleging they were racially abused by a Qatari player. We've also had an Ireland player in their game alleged racial abuse by a Kuwaiti player. And that was an under-21 game, the Irish won.
Yeah, I mean the Qataris denied it. They claim actually it was the other way around. But I think actually quite encouraging though. I thought that the fact that players, coaches are taking matters into their own hands, because they don't, they need to show by their actions they're not going to accept this.
Yeah, Rob, the order of the communications with that Qatar story was also really, really interesting to follow, wasn't it? I mean, there was the news, obviously, that the New Zealanders had not reappeared for the second half, alleging the racism. Then what did we have? We had Carlos Queiroz, the Qatar coach, afterwards saying, "Oh, they just didn't show up. No one said anything. Our players deny anything had happened." Then a full 24 hours later, the alleged racist on the Qatari side, he then, through the Qatari FA, puts a statement out saying, with the Qatari FA saying he was racially abused. So a full 24 hours before the Qataris actually said their guy was the target. I mean, now there's so much kind of murkiness and muddiness. The stories, might just dissipate and it goes away. But it's a big deal, right? An international match didn't finish.
I think the way it spiraled as an issue certainly alerted them at the high ends of the Qatari government, because initially it was Carlos Queiroz sort of talking pitch side, and perhaps a realisation how a sporting and football issue can become a global issue, though Qatar perhaps should be aware of that, having had the World Cup and all the build-up to that.
Yeah, it was Carlos Queiroz. He's some sort of interesting interview afterwards. He said there were no witnesses to what happened. So it was just one player's word against another. So I suppose if that is the case, then you can sort of say what you want in your defence, because it's going to be difficult to get substantiated proof.
I mean, FIFA does have the minimum 10-game ban for racism, and these are games under FIFA jurisdiction, and there is no mitigation, is there, in terms of, as you see with the New Zealand Qatar case, both players are accusing each other of racial abuse.
Yeah, I mean, if there are literally no witnesses to that, then I guess FIFA won't be able to do anything to either of them.
Which happened with Rhian Brewster while he was playing for England youth team a few years ago.
Yeah, exactly that. I have to think about that. Yeah, that's it. And there was no action taken against the alleged perpetrators just because of that very thing.
Yeah, FIFA would point out they are actually doing work on social media abuse. They published some findings of their research into the players that were abused during the Men's World Cup in Qatar, how they've used AI, isn't it, to try and weed out some of the abuse. But no sense of any pressure they're actually putting on the social media firms. No Infantino, Elon Musk correspondence call or pressure. It's all about, isn't it, trying to eradicate it once it's already happened?
Yeah. the online harms thing is something that the British government is tackling, and I think it looks like it could be quite a good weapon in like forcing the social media platforms to take responsibilities for what actually runs on their platforms. But more globally, that there isn't that sort of legislative threat against them.
And the next World Cup, Men's World Cup, will be in North America, in United States, Canada, and Mexico. And we've had homophobic abuse in a US-Mexico game, which led to that being halted.
Again, Rob, US, Mexico, it's again, every time, it seems very hard to kind of root that out of the Mexican football culture, doesn't it? This homophobia, and there was obviously that chant when the goalkeeper kicks the ball out, and they have been fined repeatedly as well, haven't they? Yet doesn't seem to have any real difference in terms of making it stop.
And perhaps it's not become a global issue in the way that perhaps if it involved the previous World Cup hosts, it might have been, say, if a Russia game ahead of 2018, a Qatar game ahead of 2022 had seen their fans homophobically abusing opponents, it would perhaps be a bigger global issue. But it's not, is it?
No, it hasn't been, but as you say, it might be now. Mexico are the host, so yeah, let's keep monitoring that one.
If you bring a major international event to your shores, you're going to get the attention. Obviously, the Qatari one was so extreme, just the venue and the idea of Qatar and all the rest of it. They'll claim, why are we getting so much more focus than anyone else? One, no one had heard of the place before they'd secured the World Cup. I don't even mean that flippantly. Like, a lot of people hadn't heard of Qatar in 2009-10. And then it was just kind of such an absurd destination that it was always likely to get a lot more attention than anywhere else that would have previously hosted a World Cup. But yeah, once you get it, you're going to get the attention.
Although maybe it's a sign a lot of North American football just gets overlooked, even when it's an international game in an instant. It just doesn't get the global attention in a way European or even South American football in instance in international games might do.
No, that's a fair point. That's a fair point, Rob.
Well, we have heard a lot from FIFA in recent years about changes to the way agents can act and how much money they can make from the game. But there is an ongoing backlash, isn't there, Martyn, against these FIFA regulations, and now particularly in England as well.
Yeah, for the leading agents, including Wasserman and Stella, they have taken legal action against the FA because the domestic transfer regulations that are coming into force on October the 1st they'll mirror FIFA's for international transfer, and they will say agents' fees are going to be capped at 10% of a transfer, and I think 6% of a player's contract. Now the agents are claiming this is anti-competitive, so there's an arbitration hearing is going to take place, and they have committed to making a decision before September the 30th on this, and they are also simultaneously doing it with FIFA in the UK as well. So it's an interesting one. Anti-competitive 10% of the transfer fee, or do you think that is fair enough?
It's actually more generous, Martyn, than the FIFA one. 10%. The FIFA one is 3% for the buying club, 3% from this. You can do dual representation, so it's up to about 6%. The 10% is actually quite generous. And these lawsuits, they're being filed all across Europe. There's been a slate of cases in Germany, in Switzerland, in the Netherlands, in Belgium. You mentioned England there, and there's also a case in front of CAS. But the most important one is at the ECJ, with the European Court of Justice, against these FIFA regulations. And obviously, with Brexit, Britain doesn't have to adhere to it, but the rest of the European transfer system will. Again, it's about restraint of trade that the agents are claiming.
Yeah, for perhaps a lot of fans, they might see it as a good thing. Oh, less money's going out the game to agents. Well, that, of course, overlooks the role that agents are needed to help sort of facilitate transfers in a way.
Yeah, but also this cap, guys, is just for the transfer. FIFA's rules aren't saying that agents can't make money any other way. So, for example, an agent does a bunch of things for players. They do, say something like that, Instagram and Twitter, their messaging. They do their private wealth stuff sometimes. They do all sorts of things, maybe some of their housing. These are all services that agents can provide to players for an additional fee. And I was talking to some agents, and they say, "Well, hang on. Traditionally, we just sort of roll that in for free, so they just expect it. But maybe they shouldn't, and you should have an itemized service bill. Like maybe it brings the world of agents into the modern world a bit, and then you do provide ancillary services that have a cost to them.
Players can pay agents more themselves.
Exactly right.
Yeah, you're right. I think basically most agents haven't taken payments from players because they've just taken the chunk of the transfer fee or the commission when they sign a new contract. So, I mean, just to give an illustration of the most extreme example, the infamous Mino Raiola deal with Paul Pogba when he moved from Juventus to Manchester United in 2016. So I think the total transfer fee was 89 million. 24 million of that was paid by Juventus. This is pounds. It was paid by Juventus to Raiola. Manchester United paid another 15 million pounds to Raiola directly for his services working for the club. And then apparently, according to Football Leaks, £2 million was paid by Pogba to Raiola, totaling £41 million. So
yeah, it's a life's work in one transfer, Martyn.
Yeah, so you can see why people think that it's got out of hand, and it is money getting out of the game, basically into agents' pockets. So I think I would be surprised if you find a fan who doesn't think that they are overpaid and something needs to be done.
But when they're saying that it's there's a risk to the small time agents that 3% and some transfers are very small, etc. But the argument is like, well, so what? No one owes anyone a career if there's no market for them. You don't want to just create a condition just so, I don't know, a bunch of small agents exist. And that's the way football will be governed. It's a good question, I guess, but the cap and the rules, might mirror a little bit what happens. I think in the US there are caps and there is a system, but I don't know. It's a global transfer market, isn't it? Different markets, different sizes, different.
And of course, the US has the draft as well.
Yeah, it's different, but
and in soccer, the transfers are all centrally handled, aren't they, by MLS? You do the contract centrally with Major League Soccer.
Martyn, do you think the transfer market and the agents required being tamed or some regulation? There's also these exams to have to take, and FIFA's going to license them again, having given up 10 years ago. So,
yeah, I think probably worthwhile. I'm sort of less impressed by the exam thing. I think okay, fair enough, but I do think some sort of regulation over the money, because I mean in some cases it's virtual sort of third party ownership, and that in order to get a player transferred from one club to another, you have to pay one or two or more agents huge chunks of money just to get the deal done, and that it should really be just between the clubs and the player rather than rewarding the agents.
And the bigger ones have a huge influence on the market. They can hold up transfers, or right until the wire. Sometimes they miss it by saying, this is the agency fee that needs to be paid, or the transfer doesn't happen. I've heard of transfers collapse because of agent demands, and that seems like a market failure, doesn't it? Team A wants a player, Team B wants to sell the player, and it doesn't happen because of a third party.
One other big piece of breaking Olympic news this week was the fact that the Paris 2024 headquarters have been raided by police, Tariq. I mean, it's fair to say it's not been the easiest time for French sports administration. Yet another issue now potentially arising.
Yeah, quite hugely embarrassing and worrying, isn't it? I mean, so we've had the scandals at the French Football Federation that lost a president, handball, basketball as well, I think, and now the Olympics. The blue ribbon event, the one that was going to put France, or will put France, and in the global. In front of the global eyeballs when it comes to sport, with billions of people watching. And again, it's another Olympic Games that has got this taint of corruption to it. We've had Rio Olympics, Tokyo Olympics, and now Paris. And this
a lot of those Olympics were about vote buying, weren't they? These scandals in terms of...
No, Rio, you've got everything. You've got the vote buying in the beginning, and then you've got the construction costs that, part of the Petrobras scandal and Odebrecht and those big construction companies. It's disastrous. This thing in France stems from an investigation that started as long ago as 2017. 2 investigations into corruption with regards to construction contracts and other contracts. I must say, Olympics corruption. I want to say I was shocked.
An anti-Olympic group saying in a statement, "For us, an event of Olympic proportions cannot be held without corruption. It's the size of the event that makes it necessary, whatever the country."
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. We heard in the IOC, I suppose, will put something anodyne if they haven't yet out, and we'll kind of move on until the next Olympics take place, and we might hear another story like this.
Yeah. I mean, the issue is how many contracts were awarded, isn't it? Well, we wait to hear from the IOC.
Great stuff, guys.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. As ever, you can hit subscribe and we land in your feed automatically. But for now, thank you for listening.